I am almost ready. As you come in, please let me know if you hear me okay. Let me know if all's going well. Also, making sure to get a couple of things set up. Wow, I got a little activity going on outside. Apparently, helicopters and all kind of stuff. I hope people are okay. How are you all out there? Hopefully, everyone is doing okay. Um, a bunch of topics to talk about. So many things we could talk about always, but I had a handful of topics which kind of jumped out and caught my attention. Of course, we have to talk about Bill Cosby being released from prison. Um, we also had Donald Rumsfeld, the passing of Donald Rumsfeld. Let's see. Also, um, it almost seems like deja vu, but not that long ago, they found a mass burial, I believe, in another part of Canada, separate part of Canada, where they found, I believe, 250 Native American children which had been lost over the years. And so I guess now, I don't know how many we're up to now, but we're starting to find more and more of these things as they're starting to do more excavation in these different areas. So that's a couple of the topics I wanted to talk about. Let me check to see if there was anything else I'm missing. Oh, yes. And of course, from the building collapse in my, sorry, the building collapse in Miami. Right now, the death toll is at 12. There's still over 148 missing. Um, right now, there's all kind of resources being poured out, and if you are in the area and you can donate to help in any kind of way, reach out to. I believe it was. I'd have to look it up. I'm sorry. Sorry, I can't remember, but it was something Surfside specifically as far as like the GoFundMe's. So make sure to get in touch with anybody in that local area before you do any donations, because you want to make sure it's actually going to the right cause to be able to actually help the people, and you're not being ripped off. Because sadly enough, in times like this, there are still many people who will scam to take advantage of tragedies like this. Let's see. Wow, my glasses are horribly dirty. Sorry about that. And as you come in, please say hello. Let me know how you're doing. I do enjoy to have conversation with my chat. I feel that is a good way for me also to learn new things and also see things from different perspectives. So I definitely enjoy when you guys hop in the chat and give me feedback. So I guess I'll start off. This is what I've been thinking with Marcus Cage. I am Marcus Cage. And the first story that we're going to talk about, of course, just going ahead and get it out of the way. We'll talk about Bill Cosby. Bill Cosby being released. Now, a lot of people are wondering why or how, and Supreme Court got involved. The main reason why, in my opinion only, I want to completely declare this is my opinion. Oh, Did I not give myself a drink? Oh, never mind. Anyway, my opinion only is that the reason why they let Bill Cosby off, for one, because he's older in age, and it when you're appealing and they're trying to keep an old man who still has some part of a sizable amount of America who has love and affection for him. It looks kind of just in poor nature. So that's why I feel partially why they kind of let him out. Another reason why is because of the way some of the evidence was used. To sum it up in short, I would say that it was a failure of due process. And what I mean by that is because they used some information that was not applicable directly to this case. For this case, it clouded the boundaries between evidence which is admissible for his particular case. So what that means is they used stuff which they shouldn't have, and it got thrown out. Now, another reason why they would do that is because if he's able to be convicted that easily and it's able to be used, you know, other encounters which didn't press charges or and what I mean by that is I hate to sound like I'm some kind of defender of any kind of sick psychotic abusers at all, but what I mean is, say for instance a guy tries to aggressively kiss a woman multiple times and he comes up with charges on another woman, but nobody's actually seen anything like that. And what they did is they took this behavior in the past with this woman and tied it to the accusation. And that's the reason why it got thrown out, because it becomes a slippery slope how you can apply that information, you know, down the line. And they got worried about maybe some of these, you know, people up at the top, they might be vulnerable also. And so if suits came out and they had to press charges, it puts them in an awkward situation. Just my opinion, of course, just my opinion. Let's see. Next subject, we will go on ahead and talk about Mr. Rumsfeld. Let's see, Donald Rumsfeld. Oh, I see Kelly's in the chat. Well, I guess maybe for a minute. Rest in hell, I'm guessing. Yeah, Donald Rumsfeld. We can go all into his career and everything, but it's no point. I mean, he's a typical corrupt neocon Republican. Corrupt as can be, always looking out for the corporation first and foremost, thinking like a CEO, no matter what his government position was. He started off in the, I want to say, Gerald Ford administration in '75. And then he bounced around back and forth between government and being a lobbyist, and then back into the private sector, and then back into government again, until winding himself right back up into George W. Bush. Now, I've heard over the years the Republicans scream and cry and rant about Obama was the worst president ever. And then I've had to listen to the Democrats scream and cry about Trump is the worst president ever. And the reason why they would make that argument is because most Americans only look at what the president's doing, how it affects them, and people in their surroundings. They don't look at United States, because it is the superpower which pushes its will around the whole entire world. Whoever is in charge in the United States is responsible directly for many of the actions which go on outside of the United States. Case in point, Iraq. We went into Iraq on faulty information and a bunch of lies. And that completely disrupted that whole entire region. And it has been nonstop war ever since and continued to expand. Now, we look at Trump being so bad and he might have done this or done that. But we got to remember George W. Bush and Donald Rumsfeld and Dick Cheney and Colin Powell and Condoleezza Rice, all of those people were the people who killed millions because of their actions. Americans and people of other countries. Hold on one second. Sorry, I had to get me something to drink. I left my drink in there, but I decided to try to go on like a champ, but obviously I cannot. So, need to sip for a second. Now, Rumsfeld. Back on to Donald Rumsfeld. He decided, he's the one who had the idea that, now let's take the first off, I want to, I guess, frame the narrative. We're going with the mindset that we're actually trying to win in Iraq and actually accomplish a quick victory like what was promised. Let's go with that narrative for a second. So, he decided that he wanted to run the military like a corporation, meaning he wanted to try to use as little troops as possible. Instead of like Desert Storm, when the United States sent out hundreds of thousands of troops and completely just overwhelmed Iraq and Kuwait with American troops and coalition forces. Instead, what he did was he tried to lean heavily on the spec warfare, or the special operators. They leaned heavily on them. The EOD, and any of those different groups like that, pararescuemen, whatever, SEALs, you can name it, Delta Force down the list. They use a lot of them. They try to use a lot of smaller detachments, thinking that if they can go in and just capture or kill this one person, it just solved everything. Not realizing and not thinking about the people who are there don't want you there. Neither the people who you say you're coming to free or liberate or whatever crazy excuse you come up with, or the people who are there who are fighting you now. Nobody wanted you there. In fact, to this day, many of the people are telling the U.S. to get out almost every day, and they're literally ignoring what those supposedly sovereign countries are able to do within their own country. If they can't tell another country you need to leave, then how sovereign are you actually? I mean, in my opinion, you're kind of more of a vassal state in that case, because you're having to do business on this person's terms and do what they tell you to do, enact laws which they decide you should enact, train your forces, or whichever laws you decide to make, or they tell you we don't like these laws or those laws. I'm not trying to defend any of the horrible laws which many countries enact, but I'm saying if you're a sovereign nation, it should be your duty to be able to enact your laws without a superpower deciding, well, we're just going to park our ass in your country for the next 20, possibly 30, 40 years. The United States, and it cracks me up. I watched this video the other day. Some black conservative guy, I don't know who he is. He's big on TikTok apparently, and he's like screaming at the top of his lungs, like, I mean, like he's a complete moron for one, about why a black man would have issues and not completely be proud of America. And he started going into rants about a couple of the Olympic athletes and how one of them talked about how she was going to, like, I guess afterwards, like, burn the flag or something, and another one wouldn't, like she turned her back to the anthem, and this guy is like screaming at the top of his, I mean, like losing it. And I'm sitting here thinking, I get it. In today's day, we do need to learn to try to work through the problems of the past. And we need to all be peaceable and try to get along. But to tell somebody that they don't even have the right to have resentment for things that have happened. And it's funny because this is a black man telling another black man that if he doesn't love America, then he needs to leave. And it's like, when I look around the other countries, I think, to what? You're gonna go basically to another country with basically the same social economic system, where you're just gonna go to another country where you're going to be at the bottom more than likely, or middle to the bottom, and you're going to be a stranger in this country. So therefore, you have less advantage because at least in America, at least you understand some of how things are working. You have some allies. You go to another country, you don't have any allies. Who's going to help you if you do decide to go to Zimbabwe or something? What people who make that claim don't understand is, those people who make that claim might consider all darker skinned people all Africans. You're all just Africa. There's no difference. Whatever. Some of you guys, I guess, maybe some kind of raping or whatever during the slave trades, and that's why you look a little different. And that's just the only rationale they have, if they're all the same people. But they don't realize those tribes are different nations. It's not, you could just hop back over there and they're like, oh, yeah, you're one of us. It doesn't work that way. If you look at just what goes on inside of Africa, how much tribalism and how much war and genocide has went on between different African tribes, it's silly to think you could just take people who have a similar skin tone and just toss them right in the middle of that, and they're going to know what the hell to do, or that's a better solution. And then another thing about it, which frustrated me, is like, the people of the Atlantic slave trade are the only people that didn't ask to come here. So when you weren't asked to come here and your ancestors built up this country, and now when it just starts getting to the point where things are starting to get a little bit better in some ways it's getting worse, I would say. But when it gets to that point, then you tell them you need to get out and leave. And it's like, are you serious? I need to leave? No, if I'm leaving, my pockets need to be so heavy I can barely walk. That's the only way I'm leaving, because my ancestors built up this country just as much as you feel yours did. Maybe in different ways, but we definitely contribute far more than enough than for any random person to tell us we need to get out of the country. And then, by the way, I didn't remember Caucasians being indigenous to North America. So how can you come over to a land, steal it, genocide most of the people, and then, perpetuate racism and slavery? And then even when there are people of other groups who want to try to help, like white abolitionists and civil rights leaders and all kind of people who try to come out and help, you kill your own white people because they want to tell you, hey, maybe guys, we need to chill out. This isn't cool. And that's been the history of this country. And then you say, well, okay, be all separate by yourself. When they did try to be separate by themselves, I can show you at least 20 black towns which were completely, you know, terrorist targeted by the people of this nation. And it was allowed by the law enforcement in those local areas. And majority of the people received no penalties. And it's a wonder why people would have some, kind of, harboring a little bit of animosity towards this country. It just floors me whenever I hear somebody who has the nerve to tell somebody who comes from that background, or especially like the natives, if you're of native background, to tell a native, you better love the red, white, and blue. It's like, literally, you guys literally stole my country and genocided conservatively 100 million to 200 million of my people. And I need to just forgive you and be all cool with you. And it's the same thing with the African American community also, and many Latinos also. It's the same thing. I mean, killed killed millions and millions and millions and millions. It wasn't like it was a war where it was equal. It was a slaughter, a mass slaughter. And then the United States said, after we've already slaughtered and completely dominate all these people, let's go around the world and just start whatever place which Great Britain is not doing that in. Let's go to the other places and do it. And Spain and France, they said, let's do it too. And then during those time periods, after they did that, a lot of those same people came over and with that wealth that they pillaged from all those places, became a lot of the major powers which run this country. And you can tell by this legislation that they're still racist. And yet, we need to love this country. In fact, you know what? That's going off topic. So you know what? I'm gonna get off of that, because that guy, I could go into a whole video on him, just how ignorant he sounds. And I'm pretty sure if I said something like that, I can imagine my ancestors literally getting up and strangling me in my sleep. It's like, how dare you like spit on our blood, on our sacrifice. But anyway, let's see. What was my next topic? Oh, I guess we will talk about the building collapse. I talked about it a little bit on my car rides chat, but I guess I'll go into it a little bit more now that I know more about what some of the experts say was the cause. Excuse me. Well, there was a lot of water which was coming in through the basement areas and one of the basement parking structures. Now, the way the building was, it sets apart like they had two separate wings. The northern wing was a little bit higher in elevation. The other one was slightly below. They weren't sure exactly where this water was coming from, but they were having massive amounts of water that was constantly coming in for years. This has been an ongoing problem. Now, keep that in mind. Ongoing problem. I saw literally one of the maintenance men who worked there. His story. I guess what his interview. He said that it would get so bad that they would watch the cars literally floating in the parking garage, and that sometimes they would come back, trying to use all this suction and all these things to try to get the water out. But what would happen is they never could really get all the water out. And they would come back after a certain amount of time and all the water would be gone. Now, evaporation does happen, but not that much water and not in a dark area. Parking garages are dark, kind of musky areas. So it's going to hold that moisture, especially with the concrete. And therein lies my theory. The concrete, and which I did a little research into it, so I won't try to take complete credit like I'm some kind of genius or wizard or something. What happens is, because the concrete is dry, that rebar that sits on the inside, the concrete, I mean, not the concrete, but that salt water, as it gets in there, it sticks to the rebar. And as it sticks to the rebar, it starts to expand. And as it reaches more and more dry parts of that cement, which the columns are holding up, or the load bearing beams, concrete load bearing beams with a rebar inside. As that water sits on it and it creeps up almost like a straw, it keeps expanding and expanding. And so as it expands that metal, a little crack, a little crack, a little crack, a little crack, and it's just kind of cracking up from the bottom, slowly from the inside, until you start having big chunks like falling off on the sides. That's what was happening while they were doing all these other things, trying to patch it up with epoxy and glue and all this stuff, but they were still having tons of water coming in. And then they were still having these giant chunks fall out. There were all kind of pictures which you can see where they had plaster and different things where they had tried their best to, I guess, fix it or cover it up, but it just wasn't enough. And what they also noticed is that the other garage, which was the higher elevation, that one did not have the problem with the flooding. And so it's obvious that that's where that came from. I mean, it's sad what happened. Um, oh, and other information onto that. It's a lot of people are scared now all over Miami because it's the fear that it's a possibility that all these places in Miami, which have all these cracks, that they've been, I guess what structural. I can't even think of the words right now, but the people who go out and check the structures and see how sturdy they are, and I can't remember. Never mind. If you can remember, put it in the chat what I'm trying to say. But the people who actually go out and check structural integrity and make sure everything's up to code, um, they have put out many warnings to many places throughout, Miami and that surrounding area about those kinds of things. And it doesn't surprise me. When I lived in Florida, I lived in North Florida, so not near Miami, and this isn't exactly the same. But when I worked delivery, there was times where we would have to take refrigerators upstairs, and some of these houses, like the stairs and the whole house would be shaking while we're taking the refrigerator up there. Now, keep in mind, at the time roughly about maybe 220. The other person I work with probably about the same, about 220. So what, 440 pounds there, plus a refrigerator. We're talking about close to 1,000 pounds with the dolly and all that stuff. So 1,000 pounds is like shaking this whole like house, and there were plenty of houses like that. And I had the pleasure of talking to one of the local mayors at one of the beach towns. She was a mayor of, I believe it was Neptune Beach. It was either Neptune or no, it was Neptune Beach. And she literally told me that down at City Hall there are literally blueprints for houses that are written in crayon, and they're accepted, and permits granted, and go out build, literally written in crayon. And so if they're writing in crayon, I don't know how serious they're taking most of the construction and building that they're doing. So it makes sense that in Florida you might start having some of those problems. And I noticed when I was there, the beach erosion that you would see, year after year. And you go back and look at some old photos, because a lot of those like bars and restaurants out at the beach, they would literally have like all kind of old pictures, and it's showing like how the original like little sea walk would be, and all little business and everything. Pretty cool looking pictures. But the point is, you could see that the coastline was much further away back then. And with each photo, if you really look closely, you could could see it inching in, inching in, inching in. And so I was wondering, like I always thought, before I even really start thinking about climate change, I was thinking with Florida having all the sinkholes that pop up randomly all over the place, literally Central Florida, most of that is like marshy all over it. So completely like it's water, probably 50-50 across a good part of, that center part of Florida near Tampa, Clearwater, um, Brandon, St. Petersburg, that area. It's a lot of water right in that area. And so it goes in pretty deep. I want to say to, goodness, I can't remember. I'm starting to forget, the towns. But anyway, to a little bit closer to Central Florida, not quite all the way over to, say, Orlando. But if you have the beaches and water already rolling in and you have erosion in, if you had any kind of major, say, because there are nuclear plants there, say you have any kind of major nuclear plant, there's a problem, you could easily have a crack and have, God knows what kind of problem that could happen. And I've always kind of feared and thought about that in the back of my mind about Florida, even though I enjoyed living there and I thought it was, fun in some ways. But in the United States, every place you go, there's a lot of crap these days. So you're not safe no matter which place you go to. Every place has pros and cons, and some people in certain places I've lived, it's a little harder for them to accept their cons than others. Some places are like, yeah, gas prices are super high. It sucks. Some people are like, yeah, our public transportation is horrible. Some people will say, yes, a lot of our people here suck. A lot of people can be honest about some of the downfalls or negative things about their cities. And I feel like that's a big problem that Americans have as a whole. Not wanting to recognize, or do self reflection on this nation as a whole. You can be proud of the good things, but to ignore the bad things that happen is like erasing history. And that's even worse because the old saying, everybody knows it, if you don't know history, you're doomed to repeat it. And that's what that's the that's one of the downfalls and problems which you'll set up. And it'll start with misunderstandings because of lack of knowledge. And then it'll increase to bigger divisions between people. And then it goes back into some of the big problems which you had during segregation and all that. Because you'll have certain groups of white people who will feel like, I don't see what their problem is. I don't see what you're complaining about. Everything is fine. And they're only looking at right now, right in the moment. But they're not looking at how we got here. It's kind of like if you walk in, and like say you have a roommate and you walk in on your roommate or your wife or whatever, your girlfriend, boyfriend, whatever. You walk in and they're already watching a movie. And you just kind of take what's going on in the movie and just go from there. Yeah, you can draw some conclusions to some things, but unless you paid attention from the beginning and you start going earliest you can go back to that story and understand the genesis of that and how it graduated to where it is at this point, then you can understand the complex layers of it. Then you can understand some of the grievances and gripes. Then you can deal more diplomatically with people who are feeling aggrieved and aren't as tactful or as calm in the way they put it out. And sometimes it's going to come out as a barrage against all. I know most of those people in their heart, it's not. It's just that when that kind of anger builds up and you deal with a couple of situations here and there, it's easy to, brand all, even though that's not what you mean, it's just something you're saying in anger. Let's see. One more subject that I had in mind. Let's see what Thomas has to say. Half of Florida is sinking in evaluation due to sea level rise. The swamp and lake areas will become a sea. Climate scientists and engineers are worried about the mass structural damage during the next 40 years. That's something that I just used to wonder about all the time. And like, I, when I was living there and I would think about, wow, this place is also really humid, also. So, not only do you have the water and the sea level rising, you have that moisture that's constantly coming down because that's what a lot of the humidity is. It's still kind of vapors and gases coming down, and that gas is still liquid to a degree. It's just smaller and smaller, tiny millidroplets, which that does add up to a drop, and then drops add to more drops, and it adds to that level, over time, especially if it's continuously doing it and it's doing it on a mass scale across that whole landmass. And then to tie that in, then you have more and more storms, and the storms have been getting stronger and stronger. Um, we're already coming right around to another hurricane season, and so no telling what we might see. And if they're already talking about all the structural damage with some of these buildings, flooding is going to be something that we're going to have to worry about. Elevation definitely. Even though I was in North Florida, in Jacksonville, we were only, depending on where you were, it was like 16 feet above sea level. Um, so, and that's one thing which Jacksonville was always lucky. It never really got hit dead on. Well, I won't say never. It hasn't in a long time got hit dead on with a storm. And the reason why is because the way the jet stream comes up the coast, as the storm's starting to come in, that jet stream normally catches it and kind of pushes it right on up. So what normally happens is it pushes it back out a little, and then it comes back in around the North Carolina area. Or a lot of times it's a little bit weaker and it brushes across that whole Virginia, D.C. area and going up into like the New Jersey, Pennsylvania, New York area. That's when they start getting all those nor'easters. Um, well, let's see. Yeah, I was getting myself a little bit mixed up for a second, but yeah. What else did I have to talk about? Because I could talk about my theories on Florida and how long I think we have to have before something major happens, like a certain part just like completely just breaks off, and it's almost like some kind of crazy like 2012 action flick or something, you know, or natural disaster flick. Um. Oh yeah, this one is kind of a really tragic, sad story. It's something that many of the people have suspected for many years. They just never could prove it, and now it could be proven. At the time when the United States and Canada was colonizing this area, and at the time when they had kind of taken over and suppressed the original indigenous population, um, and this was kind of at the point when some were actually in slavery, some weren't, and some were kind of in a situation where the tribes were trying to negotiate, but they were forcing really harsh terms on the natives. So part of those terms, which a lot of them took, were these boarding schools. In these boarding schools, they were supposed to train these kids about American ideals and values and how to be good, productive American citizens. And so it went into the whole cutting of the hair, um, learning about American traditions, getting rid of, your native customs. Stop learning about all those things. America is the way, and so that's what was taught. And one of the slogans actually was, what was it? Kill the Indian, save the man. And so that was their approach. Some kids would come back home after a while. It would sink in on some wouldn't take. But some kids just didn't come back. And they came up with all kind of excuses and this and that, and eventually that led to breaks in treaties and back to wars and things like that. But the children were never found. I want to say maybe a month ago, I think there was like 235 kids found, um, all indigenous children, um, which their parents and their tribes had been looking for them, knew that they were taken to those what Reformation schools or boarding schools. Um, they knew they'd been searching, and now they finally turned up, and the tribes finally have some answers, even though there's very solemn answers. They have answers to what have happened to some of their loved ones. So sometimes closure is good, but like we talk about history. If you're not studying history and don't know history, then you don't understand. You wouldn't understand what happened when the early I was gonna say colonizers. Well, fuck it, that's what they are really. The early colonizers. If you don't know that interaction and that it didn't start off peacefully, well, it did start off peacefully initially because the indigenous people trained them. I mean, I don't want to say train, but they taught them so many things. They taught them how to survive in the winters. They taught them, different ways to hunt. They taught them different ways to farm. There was just so many different ways which they taught them ways to cultivate their meat, preserve it in the way the natives did it. There were just so many things that were taught to them, and it was kind of like, all right, now we got all their secrets. We don't need them anymore. Time to bump them out of the way, and then we can just keep the land. And that's the history. Now, are we expecting for you, if you are a descendant of those people, to be, to run around apologizing every 5 minutes? No. But to pretend it didn't exist, to try to, you know, change the subject when people talk about it, to not want to face it, is in a way dismissing it. And if you do have some kind of sympathy to, that pain and that plight of those people, which your people harmed in the past, then instead of getting upset when they might phrase it in different ways where it might come off more offensively, try to let some of those kind of just roll right on by, and then try to ask them, to go in detail why they feel that way, what happened. And a lot of times when you hear people's stories, you understand it a little bit more. You may not agree. I mean, you still may not agree, but at least you understand it. Understanding is the most important tool in, you know, getting any kind of advancement in any kind of situation you're trying to deal with. You have to understand it to know what to do. And if you don't understand the people that you're dealing with and interacting with, then you don't even realize when you're being offensive to them. And sometimes little things like that can make a huge difference. I guarantee you, in the business world, a lot of these big time businessmen are extremely thin skinned. And if they heard that, CEO boss A said this joke about CEO boss B, a couple of years back at a Christmas party, they remember those kind of things and they don't get $1 million deals. And so I say, why would a person be that sensitive to, being just slightly ridiculed and give up, doing a really good business deal, which is works out mutual? Why would you let your feelings bother you that much that you're willing to just cost millions on it? depending on what it is, I'm not saying on something where you're compromising your principles. I'm saying like on a legitimate, just cool deal. Like, say you wanted to buy a stereo, and then somebody's selling a great stereo for a great price, and then all of a sudden you find out that that dude used to be mean to your sister in high school, and it's like, really, you're gonna blow this great opportunity just because you're still bitter over something small? You know, I think all of us are guilty of being petty at times, and so we all need to work on that, definitely. What do you got there, Thomas? I think I missed the 188 missing children story. But the U.S. has 20,000 recorded missing Native children, and Canada has 50,000 recorded missing children. I mean, that makes sense because, yeah, I just covered the story. I was kind of talking about it still a little bit in and out, but that recent story, it said that they found, that 188 missing children. A couple months back or a month back, they found like 230, 250, something like that. And these children are being found all over the place. And, you know, it's estimated that smallpox blankets, and keep in mind, yes, they literally put smallpox on blankets and let them get nice and infected and pass them out to natives to slaughter them. So yes, they were the first ones using chemical warfare on a whole other nation. And ironically enough, they did it again when they dropped bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. We're the only nation that has dropped a nuclear bomb on anybody. And we need to be proud of America. I mean, look at America's history with and I mean, think about it. Even for the people who so-called have it good now, say you're Italian, say you're Jewish, say you're German. How did the British people treat you when you were coming in here? Probably treated you like crap. How did they treat the Irish? I mean, I look at it like this: the people at the top, they even treat their own people like shit. So we can't be surprised when they do horrific things or their ancestors have done horrific things to us. Like, I remember somebody was saying, "Well, what? I mean, why do you guys go on and on about slavery? I mean, it was like the same as indentured servants. You couldn't rape an indentured servant. You could rape a slave. That was perfectly legal for them, and they did rape women, children, and men. In fact, they had a process called buck breaking, where for one of the strongest slaves who was kind of a little bit rebellious, they would strip him down, tie him up, bring all the other slaves out to watch while they would rape him in front of all the other slaves for intimidation. They never did nothing like that to indentured servants. That's not even in the same ballpark. Also, many indentured servants actually got paid while they were indentured servants, not after. While. So some got paid some of their money while they were indentured servants, and then some got the rest after. Also, a lot of people think, oh, well, indentured servant for 7 years. That was the max. But well, the max, unless you did something in violation where they were able to add time on. But there were plenty of people who were indentured servants for only a year, 2 years, 3 years. All the indentured servants weren't indentured servants for like 7 hard years. Some literally did it for a year because one of the perks which they offered was, if you wanted to be a slave catcher, we can knock some time off for you. Therein lies why a good majority of cops in the early days and slave catchers kind of interchangeable in those days. And I guess I could throw Klan in there. All three were kind of interchangeable in those days. I'm talking about from the end of slavery into post-slavery and police now. literally the same people who were doing that. So it makes sense that we would see the same kind of policing, you know. And a lot of those good old boys, clan types, they don't have to have a lot of them in numbers. They just have to be in the right places to affect whatever their agenda might be. What do we got here? The black freedmen once owned 20% of Oklahoma due to the 1866 treaty agreement that tribes and feds made. Black Wall Street was built on allotted land of the five tribes, but the state stole and destroyed. Yes, but I believe that but that was allowed though. They had an arrangement agreement with those native tribes though. Because even though there was what, five tribes that, you know, because that's what said the history gets really messy. That's the reason why we have to all study, because there were black men, well, actual Africans who were over here in the early days who were owning slaves too. Not very many, but there are ones that did happen. And I'm not one of those people that's going to try to hide away the different parts of history. There were five Native American tribes. The top five Native American tribes also owned slaves. That was known. And during the Trail of Tears, they literally took their slaves with them. That was, now I can't tell you exactly if the treatment was the same, but I know that yes, some of them did. Now, also there were native tribes which took in, runaway slaves and free slaves. Um, a story which a lot of people don't know of is across the border in New Mexico. There were, not sure what they were called. I forgot from the article I read, but there were kind of like coyotes, for modern day people trying to come across the border. There were people who were literally guiding people through this trail that took you across the border into Mexico. And so a lot of slaves were getting help from Native Americans also, and a lot of them were getting help from Mexicans. So it's kind of interesting when you really start digging in and understanding it, and then always keeping in the back of your mind that we're talking about the elites. We're not just talking about necessarily white people. I'm talking about the elites. And even when we're talking about ancient history or old history, we have to keep in mind it's always about the elites, because the elites are the ones who make the decisions. They're the ones who decide. The popes are the ones who decided. Every non-white Christian nation, you can go into it and plunder and slaughter and do whatever you want. That's who did that. It's their leaders do that. The Pope put out the edict, or the papal bull, and each of those nations all decided, yay, we get to go and pillage. It is time to be like Vikings and just go and rape, pillage, conquer. And that's what they did. And so the British went out doing their share. Some of the Irish were poor and slaves, but not all of them were. Some of them actually made their way down to St. Thomas and owned quite a bit of slaves also. Well, St. Thomas, Jamaica, I know I'm forgetting a couple of them. St. Bart's, St. Martin, St. Croix. Yeah, they made it down to a lot of those areas where the French were at, and they actually were in tight works with the French slave traders. So it's history is a very complex puzzle, and as we start piecing those things together, things make more sense today, in my opinion. Um, I guess that's about all I have, and I guess I ran about an hour. I figured I would just hop on here and do a live, since yesterday I had so many communication problems. So I decided I'll just hop on here and go a little longer. Well, normally I try to keep this about 30 minutes, but yeah, if I have my friends in the chat, and they're willing to have a conversation with me, then yeah, I'll go back and forth. One of these days, I need to have you on here, Thomas. I know that we'd have a fun conversation. So, uh, one of these times we're gonna have to figure it out. When's a good time for you? Good time for me? What part of the country you're on? All that stuff like that. Um, let's see. Oh, this weekend, if any of you are in the area or you could travel and you would like to, um, at Echo Park, 12 p.m. to 2 p.m. I believe that's where it'll be the home run for Assange, and the first leg I believe this will actually be the first leg of it, starting out here, and then it'll end in D.C. Um, and of course it'll be with goodness, I'm forgetting her name, Misty Winston. She'll be over there, and the people from her channel. I'm drawing a blank right now on the name of the channel. I know it's something Assange, but I've been reading so much Assange stuff lately that all of the different hashtags and stuff have been blending in my head. Um, and of course, Slow News Day, Steve Poikonen, and I believe Glory will actually be out there also. Um, and keep an eye out. You might see me. But that said, you all have a good one. I definitely enjoyed the conversation, and I will see you all tomorrow. Thank you.